Okay, everyone. Well, thanks very much for coming tonight. As you know, this is a meeting hosted by Stop the War to discuss the Trade Union Congress, which is taking place next week, and to discuss the fact that there's a resolution from the GMB union, which is essentially calling for the trade union movement to support the Western war effort in Ukraine and to get on board fully with what is in Britain a Tory-led war. This follows on from last year, where the GMB narrowly managed to get a resolution through the TUC calling for an increase in arms spending. So the stakes are pretty high here, because the danger is that we have a kind of break from what has been a couple of decades of Labour movement opposition to British foreign interventions. So thanks so much for coming. It's great to see so many of you here, and I see there's more people arriving all the time, which is fantastic. The plan is tonight, we've got a fantastic panel of 3 speakers from different unions. We have Andrew Murray, former Unite official. We have Louise Regan, who is an NEU official, and Sean Vernell, who's on the UCU exec. The 3 of them are going to speak for 7 or 8 minutes each and just put the case, put the argument, maybe give a bit of flavour of the debates that they've been involved in. And then we've got time, hopefully 20 minutes or so time for discussion, contributions, questions, points people want to make. The idea is that this is a focus meeting to maximise the impact of the anti-war movement in the Labour movement, and particularly at the TUC next week in Liverpool. So without further ado, I would like to invite Andrew Murray to kick us off and give us an overview of the situation. Andrew.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris, and welcome, comrades. It's good to see so many here this evening for what's an important discussion. There's an enormous mismatch right now between what is actually happening with the war in Ukraine and the opinions of most countries around the world regarding it, on the one hand, and the situation politically that we're facing here in Britain. The war is both, it seems, militarily stalemated, so there's no great sign it's going to be brought to an end at any time in the foreseeable future by one side or the other prevailing militarily and be able to declare a victory. The global south is more or less united in pushing for peace negotiations. Britain, the British government, is playing the leading role in obstructing that, alongside the Americans, even by some measures playing a more bellicose role than Joe Biden's administration. I guess those are sort of facts that are well known to all of you on the meeting this evening. For the last 18 months, Stop the War has been campaigning into quite a headwind. We have a monolithic parliamentary consensus behind prolonging the war, behind pouring arms into the conflict, behind rejecting any moves at a negotiated solution settlement. Unlike in the USA, there is no substantial disagreement on the right wing of politics about that, and Keir Starmer has ensured that dissent in the PLP is virtually impossible as well. So we've been fighting a bit of an uphill battle in the trade union movement this year. However, we have taken the argument to almost every major conference. We won a significant victory at the UCU, which I'm sure Sean will be able to say a bit more about. It's been a mixed bag otherwise, but generally, in contrast to last year, the arguments have been put, the debates have been had, and even if our position hasn't prevailed, we have sort of pushed the discussion in the right direction. And so we come to the TUC next week, where, I mean, as Chris has outlined, we have a very bad resolution on the agenda from the GMB. There's a less offensive one from ASLEV, and there are amendments to that. I don't know if there's going to be a compositing process or what will be left from that. But before saying a bit about some of the arguments around this resolution, I would say, of course, it's important to try and win this argument at the TUC. But the most important thing is to have the argument, is to take our position into the delegation meetings and onto the Congress floor. So to make sure that the anti-war arguments are put. We know that we have the TUC. These things are decided in the end on a block vote, and it may well be obvious before the debate even starts which way that's going to go. That shouldn't be discouragement for us. The main thing is, as I say, to take the argument into the debates at the TUC in all the delegations and the Congress itself. Now, the main objection to the GMB resolution, well, I mean, there are several. The principal one, which I believe should be focused on, is it calls for the withdrawal of Russian troops from all the territories that have been occupied in Ukraine since 2014, not since February 2022, when the invasion started, which, as you know, Stop the War condemned, but in 2014. That is really a position which means the Crimea would be returned to Ukraine. That, as far as one can tell, is not what the people of the Crimea would want at all. And it is certainly risks pushing the war to the point of nuclear conflict. At least that has been the rhetoric from Russia. It is certainly a proposal that is absolutely designed to obstruct any peace negotiations starting. It is a maximalist demand. It is not even really pushed by all the NATO governments. It has been pushed by the right wing of the NATO governments, I suppose, the most hardline and bellicose people who want this war to continue as a proxy war until the complete defeat of Russia, with all the misery and all the risks that that would entail. So that, I think, is the first point to be focused on. As Chris has indicated, the GMB has form. Last year, they won the TUC to a position of campaigning at a time of austerity for increased military spending. And I think this resolution needs to be seen in that context as well. The GMB has decided that its members, or the working class, have some investment in war because it allows for spending on manufacturing of weapons which employ union members. A desperately short-sighted, chauvinistic and backward position that doesn't take a class interest at all. And I think this is a second point to emphasize. There will be no other issue debated at the TUC next week on which Congress will be invited to effectively endorse the Tory government's policy. That is what has been proposed on this. You'll hear criticism of the government on every other issue, and indeed criticism of Keir Starmer, doubtless, on very many issues too. But on this, it is saying that somehow the Tories are acting in the national interest and following the right argument. Of course, the resolution also pushes for the continuation of arms transfers. The British government's already moved depleted uranium weapons into Ukraine, and is actually sending Ukraine more advanced weapons than the USA does, albeit in smaller quantities. So this is a very dangerous situation that we're in. The British government is lined up absolutely on the side of war, as it has been on every major conflict so far this century. The movement has got disoriented and has been sort of whipped into supporting measures that are really against the interests of the working class here. There are other, perhaps less important, flaws with the resolution that could be mentioned, more points that might, in the context of the debate, seem a bit pedantic. But one thing that should be remembered is that in condemning rightly the Russian government, including the Russian government's repression of trade unions, the Ukrainian government is not spotless on this front either. In fact, it's removed trade union rights from 70% of its own people. So just to finish up again where I started, Chris, I think the main and most important thing here is that into all the delegations we take the argument, and if you win the position in the delegation to oppose this resolution, try and get someone to speak in the debate so that the arguments can be heard and can be put out there. And I have no idea whether it's likely to win or not. A lot obviously depends on what happens in the larger delegations, Unite, Unison, you know, CWU, NEU, PCS, and so on. I have no great hopes of us still. And GMB is clearly on the wrong side. But we have to just take the arguments there so that we can come out of it and say that either we can stop the TUC adopting this warmongering position in support of Tory government policy, or at the very least we can see there is a powerful and vocal opposition. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And just to endorse what you were saying there, I think at the TUC last year, although we did lose the vote, the debate was actually a high point of the whole 3 or 4 day conference, and the arguments that were put against the war were put very eloquently and very forcefully, and I do think that was very, very important despite the disappointments. So excellent start. Thank you, Andrew. We'll now move on to Louise Regan from the NEU. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Chris, and hello, everyone. I'm a national executive member from the NEU, but I'm a full-time teacher here in Nottingham, so I teach primary children. I'll talk a little bit about the fact that I think as educationists, we have a belief in peace and teaching about peace and why that is. But I thought I'd just start with the fact that last year we did, the NEU opposed the motion from GMB. We had a speaker that spoke in the debate. He spoke really well. And we were really quite shocked that Congress voted in favour of putting more money into arms, really, because the only thing that will do is kill more working class people, really. That's what we have to remember. You know, whenever there are wars, whenever arms are around, the people that are killed are members of our class, working class people who are out there. So I think it was really important that we did that, and I'm very proud that my union took that stand and fought hard to try and win. I'm very disappointed that we didn't win that across Congress, but hopefully, this year we have to continue to think about that. One of our arguments last year was around the cost of increasing arms, and we have a government that hasn't funded any of our public services when you look at it. And we've seen that in education. Many of you will have seen the stories about the concrete situation in our schools. Many children haven't been able to return to school this year because their schools are imminently going to collapse. And the government apparently said there wasn't enough money to support schools with that. But we have already pushed back on that, and we have won some concessions. The government has changed its story and is saying it is going to fund schools to support them with that. But we have a situation in this country where we have a government who doesn't fund services here, but yet it is willing to put money into wars that we don't want to be involved with, and into wars that create a situation which is unsafe and which is very upsetting for all people. I do want to say, as a union, we did not support the invasion by Russia at all, and we do stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. But ultimately, wars never solve anything. They just create more difficulties. That's what we see all the time. We see the impact of wars in everything around us. As educators, I think this is important. Our members on a daily basis, will be talking to children about situations in the world. We will be talking to children about the fact that we care for each other and that we look after each other. And yet, we have a position now where we are thinking that we may be going to Congress, and there are people who feel that promoting war is a good thing to do. So I certainly, within my delegation for the NEU, will be arguing at our delegation meeting that we should be voting against this, and I'm sure we will get support for that. And I would say to anybody who is in the room here now, who either is going to Congress as a delegate or is a member of a trade union that has a delegation that is going to conference, you should be contacting those people in that delegation, and you should be saying to them, you should be voting against this. This is, you know, we should not be doing anything that promotes and calls on us to invest and support a government that is promoting war in the way that it is. I think it's completely unacceptable. So that is what I will be doing. I will be calling on our government, on our delegation to do that. The other thing that I just want to talk about, because I don't know if people have seen the resolution that is coming, but it talks about solidarity with Ukrainian people, including the refugees. And I completely support the fact that we should be supporting Ukrainian refugees. But actually, we have a government that is very hostile to refugees generally. And we should be saying loud and clear that we support all refugees. We shouldn't be picking and choosing which refugees we are going to support in coming to this country. We should be calling on our government to support and provide safe passage for all refugees. So I think that is another point for me, that our union particularly is very committed to supporting refugees, and there has been a very biased picture around refugees and which refugees should be supported by this government. So again, I think that is another really important point within the motion that we should be raising and challenging, really, that, you know, we should be supporting all refugees. I suppose I really don't want to talk for too long, because I'd rather hear from people and then respond to that. But I think, you know, as a union, we are committed to building for a peaceful world. We're committed to building for a world where people care for each other, support each other. That's what we do every day in our classrooms. And I think that it is really important that as trade unionists, we say very loudly and very clearly that war is never going to be the answer to the problems that we face. War never resolves any of the issues. Andrew set out very clearly what the situation is. And I think we have to really build for opposition to this in terms of, A, it's unacceptable, but B, that we need to, you know, call for peaceful resolutions to situations, not more war and conflict. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Louise. Excellent points. And full solidarity to teachers in your struggle over the collapsing infrastructure that you have to face, the absolutely shocking stories that have come out over the last few days. So actually, I wonder if Maya, if you haven't already, I can't see what we have. Could you actually put the resolution in the chat in case there are people who haven't seen the GMB resolution, if that's all right?
Yeah, give me a minute.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. And we will now move on to our third and final speaker, who is Sean Burnell from City and Islington UCU, a member of the UCU NEC. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody, and thanks everybody for turning up on such a ridiculously hot evening. And I'd first of all like to thank and send solidarity to everybody from the National Executive of UCU, and I'll explain the motion later on, which I'm sure people might have heard, but I'll go through it quickly and briefly what we managed to achieve at Congress. And I'd like to also start with thanking the work of Stop the War over the last couple of decades. It's been a crucial organisation, and one is more needed now more than ever. You haven't affiliated yet. We've got a branch meeting coming up, and hopefully we'll re-affiliate again, and hopefully people will do that so they can continue to do the work that they do. I think I want to start with really, before I go into the detail of the motion, I think I want to start with really how we approached the whole thing, really, because I mean, as people have already said, Louise and Andrew made what is a class issue. You know, if there's going to be the TUC, the workers' movement, has to be at its core a genuinely internationalist movement. And it seems to me the obvious point: wars are where the poor and unemployed of one country kill and maim the poor and unemployed of another country. That's essentially what we all know. I'm sure we do, what takes place in wars. I mean, John McLean, the famous socialist trade union activist, once said that bayonets are weapons that will have workers on either end. The same argument. And it seems to me any position detracts from that, which clearly the GMB motion does, both in terms of last year passing that quite outrageous motion, albeit narrowly, which quite clearly puts cuts against class, because in the end of the day, you can't have both things. It's either welfare, not warfare. You can't have welfare, not war, and warfare, not welfare. Clearly, the position that GMB pass has now put the trade union movement, the leadership at least, at it where we are accepting there is another. There is people which we are opposed to because they live a nationalist interest, not a class interest, and that always cuts up. And why is that important for trade unionists? Because we have a position like in a branch or anywhere else, then of course that'll weaken us. It weakens our ability to fight our employers. If we're going to fight over wages and conditions or fight for more funding into stop crumbling schools, then and so on, then we need to make sure that we don't spend it on killing other workers in other countries. It seems to me rather an elementary point, but one which is being missed by the leadership of the GMB, who clearly, and it's not the first time, is that we know that they've done it on a number of occasions, even before last year, over the question of climate and so on, always peppered with actually quite jolly racist sentiments involved, that British jobs are usually in there somewhere, and so on. So it seems to me a position that people have quite rightly outlined, that we want a truly internationalist trade union movement, which starts at its core that all workers have an interest to support and solidarity with each other, and not to sign up to kill and everybody. And that's really where we took the starting point. We met a year before our Congress. We had 25 people at it, a small gathering of people, and we started to argue that we need to try and take this position forward. We then took a motion last year and we to Congress, and we passed. The motion essentially said three things. One, we opposed the Russian intervention and demanded that the troops are withdrawn. Russian troops are withdrawn. Two, that we believe this is a proxy war, one which is not simply a battle against Ukraine on one hand, and of course Russian imperialism on another, but actually there are two imperialisms fighting this war: Russia as well as the NATO. Aggressively, it's an expansionist organization, not a defensive, which is pushing the boundaries and so on. And this is, you can't take this out. Yes, there might be a nationalist overtone to the struggles of Ukraine, but that's been consumed and subsumed by the realities of that conflict between two vying powers trying to carve up that area between them. And that really is an argument we took. And then finally, we said that, so therefore, what is the solution to this? Once you start and approach it in this way, then clearly pouring arms into that region will only make things 10, 100 times, a million times worse for both workers in Russia and workers in Ukraine and the world, indeed the world over. The fact that we somehow pouring in more arms for a military solution, there is not a military solution. We argued that pouring. Where do we stop? More cluster bombs, more depleted uranium. Why stop there? If you do believe there's going to be a military solution to the problems in Ukraine, then clearly you'll have to give the Ukraine nuclear weapons. This is a real threat, a real danger, with the likes of Putin threatening to use tactical strikes, nuclear strikes and so on. It's not just saber rattling, it's a real fear that we are moving towards the direction. And more the West pour more arms into those areas, the more likely we are likely to be pushed into that situation. And therefore we want peace now, and peace actually means fighting for that. And the only solution to that, there are no shortcuts to this. We can't rely on our warmongers. We, as others have said already, we argue in, day out, as trade unionists and as activists and socialists, against the cuts in our services, against what they're doing to refugees, against what they're doing to our wages and our conditions and the like. But they're perfectly right when it comes to the international questions. Well, clearly they're not. They are warmongers who want to do us over, as well as others in their country, for their own vested interests. And that's an argument we put. And it was a debate. It was close. We only won it closely, but we did manage to eventually win that debate. Since then, of course, there's been a bit of a backlash. I don't know if people follow these things, but in our own union, There's been quite a stir. Some people tried to call it at the National Executive, tried to pass a new motion to overturn the decision at Congress, which would be absolutely outrageous against any democratic procedures in our own union. And that didn't happen because it got dropped off the agenda and so on and so forth. But there was an attempt to do so. And this was mainly because there was internal wranglings in our own union, which I won't bore with you here, against the leadership of the General Secretary. And she saw that as an opportunity to go on the offensive. But more generally, on WhatsApp, on social media, there's a witch hunt against people, himself and others who put that motion, led by all sorts of people, not only people like Paul Mason, on behest of all sorts of spooks, no doubt, around our movement. And it's quite reflective what they're trying to do. The state do not like, they're twitchy, they did not like this motion being passed. They needed to nip it in the bud as quickly as possible to ensure that they just not catch on, it does not spread to other people to doing those things. And hence the onslaught to try and witch hunt us and smear us with all sorts of rubbish that they did. And no doubt that will continue, and we'll see if there's in our own union those people, those voices are strong enough to convince our members that we were wrong to pass that motion, overturn it. We will see. We will fight and do what we can to ensure that they don't do that next year at the next Congress or whenever it might might be. I think I also want to say something a little bit about the TUC and the G&B motion, as people have already said. I mean, it really is a very poor motion. I mean, there's clearly tries to make alliances or historical analogies. It says TUC's proud history of solidarity with victims of fascism, imperialism, aggression, including support for arms to the Spanish Republic when it too faced war of survival. Now, I mean, thank you, Maya, for some useful historical detail, looking back at the history of the TUC. Actually, they didn't actually support those brave 2,000 odd people who went over to Spain to fight against the fascists at all. And very, very blatantly later on, when the civil war had been lost. So it's not actually historically true. But also, it's a wrong argument here. Of course, that those of us who are in a tradition that supports fight against fascism, but this, as we have already established, is not a fight against one imperialist power against a poor, downtrodden nation. It is one in which is a fight between major powers trying to carve up the globe. And we as workers do not have an interest in siding with either side of those warmongers. We do have an interest to ensure that all workers' voices are heard, be they Boris Kagaleski, who's been put in prison at this moment in time for being an anti-Russian voice, or the I forgot his name, the comrade who spoke so brilliantly, so bravely from Ukraine, who's also a professor and been locked up in Ukraine at this moment in time. We want them all freed, all those voices to be heard and to be had and to be allowed to campaign in the way they see fit to stop the war continuing and so on. So to finish, therefore, I mean, clearly the lies of the warmongers will continue. I do genuinely believe we are in a minority at the moment in time. We accept that. As Andrew and others said, we don't know where we are or where we're going to be at the Congress, but it's important that we do what we can. I'm a delegate at the TCE's conference. I will try and get onto the debate and try to argue against the motion. I don't know it's going to be the case. I certainly will be carrying that argument and hopefully win that argument in our own delegation to vote against that motion. But I do think as the war unfolds, increasingly as it does, more and more people will see that the lies the warmongers are putting out and recognize that their agenda is not about Ukrainian people, it's not about Russian people, it's about their own economic and political power within that area, and forcing and building its own forces to try and expand their military power across the globe. And I think, therefore, this is why it's important. The only way we'll begin to start to raise the argument if we put the argument in the first place. And that's why the meeting tonight, but also ones at the TUC and elsewhere, it doesn't matter if you lose the argument, but there is clearly a minority in our class who are not only suspicious, but are actually furious about what is actually taking place. And our job partly here is to politically make a home for those people so that when the war continues and the horrors of that war escalate and elsewhere across the world, then clearly we can move to stop these wars once and for all. As I said at the beginning, there are no shortcuts to stopping war. It's about building a mass peace movement which can bring about the changes that we need. Thank you very much, and solidarity to everybody.
Thanks very much, Sean, and well done again to you and your comrades for winning that resolution in the UCU, and also good luck getting to speak on the floor of the Trades Union Congress. Just before we move into discussion, just a couple of practical points. One is that Maya's put the resolutions up in the chat if people want to look at them, but also he's put up a copy of a leaflet that's been produced by Stop the War, written by Andrew Murray, which is a kind of, it's a letter to trade unionists really saying why, putting the argument why we should vote against the GMB resolution. So do download that. You can get copies from the Stop the War office if you just phone us or email us at office@stopwar.org.uk. We can send them to you, but you can obviously use it virtually. You can find it on the website. So do try and get that around, because we want really this meeting to initiate a kind of period, a week-long period of intensive argument and activity in the labour movement, right up until the vote, which is taking place literally a week today. So please do that. And just one other point, which is that Stop the War actually has our annual conference, our own AGM, not this weekend, but next, on the 16th of September. And I would urge any of you who are members of Stop the War or whose unions have affiliated to actually come along to that conference, so that we can, coming out of the vote, whichever way it goes, so that we can continue to put the argument and the campaigning within the labour movement at the centre of what Stop the War does. Again, maybe if someone could put a link to the conference in the chat, that would be very useful.